Hi everybody. Now I've got to start this video off with a little warning that it will include spoilers about the plot lines and twists that are included in the Sniper Elite series of games. So please don't watch the whole thing if you haven't played them before and want to keep that secret and as a nice surprise when you should play them. However, before you do turn off, I just want to say that the premise for this video, which is, are the stories and plot lines that are in the Sniper Elite series of games, are they based on reality? The answer to that is yes, they are. So there you go. So you can go off and play the games now. And then we're done. Now for everybody else, what we do is I'm going to go through a load of Wikipedia, mainly articles, where we're going to talk about the stories from the games and the actual things that happened in World War II, or could have happened, like they were planned but didn't actually happen, which I think is more closer to the case. Now, the reason for this video is because I've wanted to make it for a number of years, because when I was playing Sniper Elite 3 in the desert and making my way through Tobruk and Hellfire Pass, I got to the end of the game, and this is the first major spoiler of the video. At the end of the game, Sniper Elite 3, you have to fight a giant tank. Okay, you have to fight a 1,000-ton tank, and I was like, what the hell is this? I was really disappointed, and it left a real bad taste in my mouth because, okay, Sniper Elite, it's arcadey, it's more like a Commando war comic or Warlord war comic or a Battle war comic take on World War II, but it kind of does have this realistic bits in it, doesn't it? You know, a kind of it's not a fantasy World War II game. And I thought, oh, that's really crap, that, and it sort of spoiled the ending of Sniper Elite 3 for me. However, I did a little bit of research and found out that actually there were plans by the Nazis to make a massive 1,000-ton tank. So let's look at the other games as well, and we can kind of talk about the different things that, okay, maybe they didn't really happen, some of them, but they were planned to happen. There were, there were plans on paper, there were blueprints to make this sort of stuff. So if we start off with the original Sniper Elite, and I'll put the links to these articles in the description below this video. You were dropped into Berlin at the end of the World War, and the idea was that you were to go after the German scientists that had been involved in the German nuclear program before they could fall into the hands of the Soviets. And of course, yes, there was a German nuclear program during World War II. You might not have known about it. Probably most famously for the film The Heroes of Telemark, where there was a heavy water facility in Norway, and heavy water is part of the process that you use to start to move towards making a nuclear bomb. And these Allied soldiers and resistance people went in and blew up this facility, which knocked back the Nazi nuclear bomb program. As it was, obviously, the Nazis never got close to making a nuclear weapon, probably because they never invested enough resources into it, and also because inherently the Nazi war machine and the Nazi government was very, very inefficient. We tend to have this false idea that the Germans during World War II were this well-oiled war machine, and the German government was like that as well. But in fact, it was nothing like that at all. Hitler's method really for governing a lot of the time was divide and conquer, and different parts of the armed services and different parts of the scientific establishment would be given the same responsibilities to research and do similar things, and they would end up fighting with each other over resources. And instead of working together, as the Allies did with the Manhattan Project that ultimately made the atomic bomb, they didn't get anywhere, which was good, obviously very, very good for us. And so what happened after? So basically, the premise behind the original Sniper Elite is true. There were Nazi scientists who were involved in nuclear weapons programs who the Allies wanted to get out of Germany at the end of World War II, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. A common theme throughout the Sniper Elite series is the Wunderwaffe weapon. So throughout the war, especially as it started to go bad, Hitler was obsessed with the idea of having these vengeance weapons, these technologically advanced weapons that would turn the tide of the war. Basically, from 1942, 1943 onwards, it was pretty obvious that the war wasn't going to go well for the Germans. They lost at Stalingrad. In 1944, you then had the Allies invading in Normandy, and the Nazis kind of thought we need something really very special to change the course of the war. So we had the V1 Doodlebugs and we had the V2 rockets, and there was other things on the drawing board as well. And this takes us into Sniper Elite V2, where the premise of this is you're going into war-torn Berlin again, because Sniper Elite V2, it's kind of like a remake, really. It's a restart, a reboot for the Sniper Elite series. So you're going into Berlin with the idea of taking out these rocket scientists, and ultimately what happens at the end is that some German rocket scientists, with the help of the Russians, funnily enough, plan to fire a V2 at London, I think it is, with nerve agents on it, with chemical weapons on it. And the Germans did have the V2. It was an amazing technological achievement, achieved at horrendous human cost with slave labour. Ultimately didn't change the course of the war, but killed thousands of innocent people in its use and in its production. And what happened during the war was that as soon as the Allies became aware of the V2 and the V1, it was a race to either, as we invaded Europe, to get to the launching places for especially V1s before they could fire, so that the UK would be too far away to fire V1s at it, and also to send heavy bomber raids at things like the V2 factories at Peenemünde to take out the production facilities. And also, the Germans did have thousands of tons of chemical weapons and nerve agents as well stockpiled throughout World War II. Now we know they used them as part of the Holocaust, which was obviously absolutely terrible, but they did have military ones as well that could have been deployed. And one of the great mysteries of World War II was why Hitler didn't authorize the use of chemical weapons, especially against the Russians in the East. From 1943 onwards, when the Eastern Front was collapsing, it would seem logical that the Nazis, who had been horrendous, and the German army horrendous towards the Russian army, that they would have had moral reasons for not using chemical weapons in the East. You could argue that in the West, against Britain and America, Hitler could have been scared about the reprisals, because Churchill was very public in saying that if the Germans use chemical weapons against us, we will use our chemical weapons against them. And the British had an awful lot of chemical weapons stockpiled. Churchill had said, back in 1940, that if the Germans managed to get a foothold in the UK, in England, he would have authorised the use of chemical weapons to try and push the German invasion out. Some people argue that Hitler never used chemical weapons because of his experiences with being injured within the First World War, but I think largely it's going to be one of those mysteries that we never really find out about. But yes, the Germans did have V2s. Yes, they did have nerve agents. They did have chemical weapons that could have been loaded onto those V2s and fired towards the west. So the premise behind what happens in Sniper Elite V2 is definitely there. What probably isn't quite so obvious is the fact that although there were tensions at the end of the Second World War between the Allies and the Soviets, the Americans, the British and the Russians, it wasn't quite yet the Cold War. That hadn't really developed yet. That we still didn't really know that the Russians weren't going to go home after the Germans were defeated. Obviously, what happened over the next couple of years, they didn't, and the Cold War started. The Russians stayed in Eastern Europe, and the Allies stayed in Western Europe. But also, at the end of the Second World War, you also had Operation Paperclip on the American side, and you had Operation Ossowiakim on the Russian side, which was this massive attempt to pull out, especially rocket scientists, from Germany and take them back to Britain, take them back to America, take them back to Soviet Russia, to use them to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, and ultimately in the space race as well. Obviously, Wernher von Braun, key part of the American space program, is probably the most famous example of this. So again, that was something that definitely was happening. And so when you come across that in Sniper Elite 1 and Sniper Elite V2, that is something that did happen at the end of the Second World War. Then we move on to Sniper Elite 3 with the giant tank. So, was there ever a giant tank in the works for the Germans? And the answer to that is yes. There were plans for the Rat, this absolutely massive 1,000-ton tank that would have been incredibly impractical. I don't know how you would have fit it on a ship. It would have to have been kind of assembled near the battlefield, I guess. It would have crushed any bridges it tried to go across. It would have crushed roads. It would have probably attracted massive air attacks if it was used in the west against the Allies. You'd have had Lancaster bombers going after it, who would have probably destroyed it. And in the east, I don't know, it might have done okay in the east. Maybe it could have been used as kind of an attacking weapon if you were trying to break into some sort of fortress or citadel, because the big battleship gun on it could have blasted through anything. As it was, never made. The Mouse, which was the smaller version of it, which was, again, massive. I think there were some bits found of that. But again, this was something that was on the books for the Germans. It was something that Hitler wanted. It never happened, thank God. But yeah, and it was in Sniper Elite 3, and it is based on historical fact. Right, Sniper Elite 4. So Sniper Elite 4 is now based in Italy. And this one, it doesn't really have a Wonder Waffe weapon at the end. It has a guided rocket or a guided missile. So the idea is, at the end of this, is the Germans are going to kill Eisenhower and destroy the Allies' invasion fleet for the invasion of Sicily and the invasion of Italy by using these guided weapons, these guided rockets. And yes, there was obviously an Allied invasion of Italy, and yes, there was a guided bomb that the Germans used during the Second World War, the Fritz X, that wasn't actually that successful, mainly because of the technological problems with it. Because if you were attacking a ship with this, the plane had to have the radio operator in it, and the plane had to be going level, or at least fairly straight, because the operator had to guide the bomb down. And so basically the bomb would drop. It has some control fins on the back. It would have a flare on the back of the bomb as well, because the plane would be up at 15,000 feet. And then the operator would have to guide it in like a remote control aeroplane, but one that's going very, very fast and dropping very, very quickly to hit the ship and ultimately work. It was used operationally, not very much, wasn't that successful, but did have some operational success. Wasn't provided in massive numbers, but it was a thing, and if the Germans had developed it more, it could have been, I guess it was really one of the first smart bombs if they'd used it like that. So Sniper Elite 4 in Italy with the Fritz X, yes, that was something that was actually there. Now, Sniper Elite 5. Now, this is really interesting, this one, because in Sniper Elite 5, the plot that you are uncovering as you play the game is the plot to fire V2s, which we saw in Sniper Elite V2, towards America. And you think, what? Surely the Germans couldn't build a V2 that was big enough to go that far, because they fired them from like Holland towards London, didn't they? Yes, they did. But the whole plan was actually to have special underwater barges that they would put the V2s into, the V2 rockets into, and these underwater barges would be towed by U-boats across the Atlantic, get them close to the American coast. These barges would flood and kind of go vertical, and then you would fire the V2 out of it and towards American cities. And if you think about cities like New York, they're pretty big, so they could have hit something. And again, these U-boats, these barges were on the books, and there were plans to try them, and there were certain tests done. And the other part of this was the idea of having a stealth German submarine with special coating on it. And yes, there was a special coating that was applied to German submarines that was effective at reducing sonar reflections. And so again, that premise in Sniper Elite 5 is based on fact. Obviously, the Germans never launched any V2s at America, but they did use the stealth submarines, like the German submarine U-480. So, let's go on to one of the key parts of Sniper Elite, which is killing Hitler. So, were there ever any plots to assassinate Hitler on behalf of the Allies? And I couldn't really find many details, but there was Operation Foxley, which was done by the SOE. The idea was to fly agents into, or parachute agents into, Germany and assassinate Hitler when he was going to the Berghof or bomb his train or something like that. As far as I can tell, nothing was actually put into place by the Allies. But here we go. This is from Wikipedia. Ultimately, a sniper attack was considered to be the method most likely to succeed. So there we go. I mean, that kind of shows you, doesn't it, the fact that it was seriously considered for an operation, even though we don't know of anything that actually happened from the Allies side of it. Hitler apparently did have some doubles, and that's kind of a theme through the Sniper Elite assassinating Hitler games. However, I think it is important to point out that lots of other people did try to kill Hitler. People did try to go after him. Obviously, rather famously was the God, this is a long list, isn't it? Was in the Wolf's Lair with Stauffenberg, Axel and Busch when they set that bomb. And if it wasn't for the heavy oak table legs that shielded Hitler from the bomb, who knows? If he had died then, could the war have ended sooner? Probably, and obviously many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people's lives could have been saved. So there we go. Is Sniper Elite based on true events? Kind of. Some of them really are, and some of them aren't quite so much. But everything really in Sniper Elite is based about on something that might have happened during the World War II, but not like fantasy. There were blueprints, there were plans to make these things. There were plans to make the giant tank. The Germans did have toxic nerve agents that they could have put on a V2. They did have an anti-ship guided missile, and they did have a stealth U-boat, and they did have plans to take V2 rockets across the Atlantic and fire them at America. So there we go. Hopefully that helped. Hopefully this has been useful and interesting, and maybe encourages you to have a go with Sniper Elite. Remember, it's not a serious mil sim. Well, one of the joys of Sniper Elite, I think, is the fact that you can play it as an arcade game. You can put it on easy level and run around with your sniper rifle and your machine gun, killing players like a Battlefield level or a Call of Duty level. But you can also put the difficulty right up, and it does become a bit like a military simulator there, where you must go ultra stealth and ultra careful. I like to play it somewhere in the middle. But there we go. So anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully you found the video useful. If you have it, like. If you want to see more of the same, press subscribe. And I will, of course, see you again soon.